Observing in Hawaii and Sketching with Eric Klaszus on episode 325 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We're amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anybody else who likes going out under the stars. I'll read a brief bio here in a moment, but Shane, we have a couple Patreon supporters to thank first.
Yeah, big thanks to Clayton and Richard, our newest Patreon supporters. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It helps keep the show going, and we just like to say thanks. So thank you.
Eric Klaszus is an amateur astronomer living in Calgary, Alberta. He is an active volunteer in the RASC, serving on the Calgary RASC Executive, and is a counselor on the National Council of the RASC. He loves getting out under the dark rural skies of Alberta with other amateur astronomers and members of the RASC. His preferred mode of transportation around the sky is star hopping with Dobsonians, both big and small. A carpenter by trade, he has built an 8-inch suitcase Dobsonian telescope that can be easily thrown or very carefully placed into a backpack and taken on hikes in the mountains or in carry-on luggage, like when flying to Hawaii, which we'll get to in a moment. Sketching became an important part of his observing experience in 2019, and this now drives his constant hunt for dark skies and local observers to head out under the stars with. Good evening, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're doing this on a Tuesday evening. Usually we record on Sunday morning, but we've had a change in schedule, so thanks so much for accommodating us.
Absolutely. Yeah, glad I could join. Life is short. Got to take advantage.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
This isn't our first go around. We had a nice conversation, I think it was about a year ago, give or take, about Sky News, and you wrote a beautiful, very nice Sky News magazine article with us and for us, and that came out in the Sky News magazine last summer. So thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely. That was a lot of fun putting that together. I always thought it was so cool how this podcast has really put its own kind of community together of visual astronomers around the world.
It's been a blast doing it. And in fact, we received a lot of positive emails from folks based on your article about us and the podcast. And we had several people refer back and say that's how they found out about the podcast. So unfortunately, Sky News is officially now no more. You know, it sort of did its job while it was around.
Yes, it will be missed.
I do want to mention one other thing. I don't think we have it in the show notes, but just another reference to Eric kind of on the podcast. And that's one of the coolest observations that I can ever think of. And that's your observation of the James Webb Space Telescope on New Year's Eve with I think a 14-inch Cassegrain in the Calgary RASC's observatory. So we talked a lot about that on episodes around that time, because it was mind-blowing, and you sketched it, and I just think that's one of the neatest observations ever.
That was such a cool night, and it was one of those moments where it's now or never. Mm-hmm. And the weather was freezing cold. We suffered greatly to get that observation, but it was so worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's incredible. And like you say, it was that moment or never. And really, it's like at this point, nobody will ever get that observation, I don't think. So that's amazing.
Because that one took you a few kicks at the can to get, I think, in some pretty brutally cold weather, where you had to go out on a few nights, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. And there was a moment where the James Webb had receded from Earth far enough that it was no longer visible. However, shortly after it unfurled its heat shield and thus increased its surface area greatly, that's when its reflectivity had a huge skyrocket again. And boom, it was visible again for only a brief time. And at that point, it was like 750,000 kilometers away, which is just mind blowing.
Absolutely. And the size of it, like it's a tiny object out there too, which is wild.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like, honestly, every day I'm amazed at what telescopes, like the simplicity of telescope optics, what you can see with them. It's so cool.
just to reiterate, this is a visual observation. He wasn't taking an image of it through a 14-inch telescope, which is quite incredible. But you did a sketch of it. And then I was asked to do just volunteer to do a presentation at the Lifelong Learning Center at the university. And you permitted me to use the sketch. And I used it as a bit of a teaser for the presentation where I was going to release a never before seen image of the James Webb Telescope.
That's awesome. In outer space.
People enjoyed it. It was good fun. Thank you for that.
That's great. Absolutely.
You've had some other adventures. One of them that stuck out in my mind was when, and I think this was during the pandemic, and you took an 8-inch reflector and a group of people up into the mountains. You did like a hike with the 8-inch reflector. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah. It was the night of the Perseid meteor shower. I think it was in August of 2020. We got together, met up with a bunch of people at a trailhead in the mountains, and we all kind of left the parking lot at sunset and went hiking into a lake in the backcountry. And I brought my 8-inch Dob with me in the backpack, and we set it up out there. We hiked in only about 5 kilometers, but oh man, the skies were spectacular, and we had the 8-inch telescope. But honestly, the telescope was the sideshow, because of course it was the Perseid meteor shower, and we were just taking that in, and it was jaw-droppingly beautiful.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. Beautiful scenery and extremely dark skies. Can't ask for much more than that.
Absolutely.
Then we missed you at Grasslands in 2021 when you stopped by. I had just purchased a cabin, and I was trying to figure out how to decommission it for the winter, and was all wrapped up into that and just couldn't make it. But it sounded like you had some pretty good skies down there, and the wind came up. But did you drag your 17.5-inch telescope down there in 21?
Oh yeah, we had really good nights. Dark, clear nights. One of the nights was super windy, so much so that I took it down for fear of it blowing over again. It has blown over before.
Oh no.
That's a different story. But yeah, I took it down because I was really worried it was going to blow over again. And at some point I was like, you know what? We're only here once. Just set it up, keep a hand on it all the time, and just hold that baby down and get some shaky views of beautiful open clusters and whatever else you could see with it just shaking away. But it was still awesome.
Okay, now you have to tell us the story about when that telescope blew over.
Oh man, that was actually only a month before. It was at the Alberta Star Party, which is kind of held in eastern Alberta in the Badlands. And the Badlands are kind of known for, wind, as is Saskatchewan. But yeah, it was during the daytime. This telescope was kind of new to me and wasn't fully accustomed to how to pin it down properly during the daytime. And the winds picked up in the daytime. And oh man, that thing went down hard. I mean, that thing is tall. It's about 8 feet tall when it's pointing straight up. So like, imagine the momentum of that. Boom.
Wow.
Right onto the ground. Somehow it survived. I mean, like, telescopes are amazing. I feel like we baby them too much. Seriously. Yeah. Like, these things, they're durable. They're bulletproof.
Well, Richard Huziak, who's been on the show as well, and Chris and I, we observe with him quite often in the Grasslands. When he was at the Saskatchewan Summer Star Party in Cypress Hills, he has a 10-inch Dob, and a big storm came through there, high winds. It blew over, but I think it came through at night. Rick will correct me here if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure if he just stayed sleeping in his tent or how it all played out. But anyway, when he came to, whether it was the next morning or later that night, the Dob was in a pool of water on its side.
Oh no.
But turned it right side up. It's a cardboard tube Dob, so there's a little bit of swelling on the cardboard, but everything was fine and he observed that night. So
That's
to your
awesome.
point, they're pretty resilient
They
instruments.
really are. Yeah.
I need to add a section into like the sort of standard questions, and we could have get like, what's your biggest telescope disaster experience? We're having Clark Muir on here in a few weeks' time. I was chatting with him over email today, and we went up to this really dark site up in the Bruce Peninsula, and this huge, crazy thunder and lightning storm came in. I guess there was like tornadoes in places, and my wife and I bought a tent from her sister, and it was just like a regular camping tent, and it was raining so hard that the tent was like 3 inches from our faces. It was really terrifying in that, and there was all this wind. And so we get out of the tents afterwards, and Clark had left his handmade 8-inch Dobsonian set up, and it was still set up. And he walks over, he's like, "Oh, this is great." And he looks inside, and it's got about 7 or 8 inches of water inside. And he just tips it out. The water comes like pouring out like from a bucket. Truly a light bucket.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like an aquarium fish bowl.
Exactly. He rebuilt that into some sort of portable scope as well. Eric, you've done lots of sketching. We'll get to that shortly, but I had to stick this in somewhere. This is that sketch of here. Why don't you tell us about what this is? A sketch of that we're looking at and what's happening here.
This is a sketch from a couple of years ago. This is M3 and the comet. I can't even remember what was this comet's name as it was passing by M3 in December, about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Super amazing night. The comet was only about 6th magnitude, but it approached quite close to M3, and there were a number of Calgary members who were super stoked to get out of the city, drive out to some dark skies super early in the morning before work, and try to make this observation. So we were dodging clouds. It was very cloudy around the area, but we were super dedicated to trying to see this event, and the clouds parted only just in time before the morning light broke. But this was actually kind of a composite sketch of a larger field than what my telescope can capture. So this was like panning around the field of these two objects and capturing all of the things in one sketch.
I think, speaking of panning, wasn't this one of the Pan-STARRS comets? I forget what the designation was, but I think it was one of the Pan-STARRS, wasn't it?
I believe so. That rings a bell.
And why I put this one in, not only do I really like this sketch an awful lot, one thing that a good, and even just a regular sketch does for me when I look at people's sketches, is they make me just want to go out and observe more. I don't know, there's something about, I like reading about astronomy, and I enjoy looking at photos and thinking about gear and that. But when I see a good sketch or really any sketches at all that people are doing, it just really just makes me want to go out and see that stuff for myself. Unlike anything else, it's very motivating for me anyway. I'm not sure if you find the same thing with your sketches or other people's sketches, but
absolutely. Yeah, it's because for me, I find they're relatable. Like when I look at a sketch, it really does feel like I'm looking at the object through the eyepiece, or it reminds me of that experience. So yeah, it's very much like, oh man, yeah, I want to go see that view too.
The other thing about this image that made me want to put it in our notes here this evening was that I believe when you sent this along, you referred to Howard Banich's sketches and how he was using a similar technique with his larger instruments. And I thought, oh, well, that's cool, because of course we hadn't communicated with Howard back then. And then we recently had him on the show. So I was just curious if...
That's right. Because I think it was only 4 months before I made this sketch. It was in... it must have been in the September 2021 issue of Sky and Telescope, I think, is when he had that article on sketching the entire Cygnus loop with his 28-inch. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I I had never thought of doing a mosaic sketch before, but after seeing that article, I was like, whoa, that is cool.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this view can't be seen like this through the eyepiece
Mm-hmm.
in one single field of view, but putting it all together by panning around and taking a good amount of time with it, it kind of brings that whole field of the sky to life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the other thing I really appreciate about this sketch is that I always like the black background with, you know, the whites or grays on top, creating the image, because this is the view through the eyepiece, you know, with the black background. And it's such a natural representation of your visual observation. So I'm a huge fan of sketching. I just don't do it, but I love looking at, you know, your guys' sketches and anybody else who does it.
How the heck did you even get interested in astronomy to begin with, Eric?
It all started in Costco.
As all good things do, right?
A common story.
Yeah, seriously. No, yeah, I was, I don't know, early teenager, maybe 13 years old. We lived out of the city quite a ways, like 40 minutes north of Edmonton in Alberta. And so we had really dark skies out there, which was awesome. But yeah, just going in Costco and walking around, we saw this telescope, and I remember telling my parents, like, wow, this looks cool. Like, it's just covered in all these epic astro photos of like glowing nebulae. So stoked. And yeah, they actually bought it, and we brought it home, set it up, and seriously, like, the first thing we looked at was a waxing crescent moon in the early evening sky. Oh man, like that was it. That deep blue sky behind the moon with the earth shine. Like, I hadn't even noticed the earth shine looking at the moon naked eye. But looking in the eyepiece, like, I was flipping out.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the start.
Public observing events, there's nothing like showing somebody either Saturn and them seeing the rings for the first time, or any phase of the moon. And all of the detail. It blows everybody's mind. And even me, looking through proper telescopes for approximately, you know, 20-ish years here, I'm still blown away by the views of the moon every single time. It's just, the detail is so phenomenal.
It really is. I feel like people generally take it for granted. I certainly take it for granted. I hate the moon. I specifically plan all of my observing events so that the moon is not in the sky. And like, I honestly am trying lately to appreciate the moon again, circle back to it. And I actually had a really good session with the moon just this last weekend.
I looked at the moon this past weekend, but it was so blindingly bright. We're out at a dark sky site-ish, just 10 minutes from my house, but it's still like Portal 3.5 or something. And then, oh man, I put the moon in my new eyepiece, and it was just so painful to look at. That was it.
Oh yeah, it's like searing. It's like a laser.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Did your family or anybody else really cultivate that interest, or was it something where they enabled you through getting this telescope and then you were on your own, or did they really help bring you along into the astronomy path?
In the observing itself, it was very much a solo endeavor. But my dad loves tinkering with stuff. He's a carpenter and just loves working on things, making things better. He's kind of got an engineer mind to him. And so this hilarious Costco telescope with like the most horrific rickety equatorial mount, like he would set out trying to like make modifications to the mount, like he'd weld parts to it to improve the way you could tilt the latitude adjustments. We got a an electric motor drive for that scope, which is hilarious that you could even get one for this thing, because it was like so basic and it was awful. And even that, he like took all the electronics apart and like put a dial on it so you could fine tune the speed of the motor.
Wow.
Like, so he went all out and definitely helped improve the equipment such that it improved the observing experience. So that was huge. That was a huge element that I think kept me going.
That's amazing. And certainly in this hobby, it's good to either be handy or know somebody that is handy, because, it doesn't really matter, whether you're buying a Costco telescope or, pick your brand. There's probably something you're going to want to do to tweak it or make it just run a little bit better. So
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
And now that I believe you have your own children now, are they tagging along in your astronomy journeys? I think I recall where you were telling me some stories about that as well.
Yeah. My son is 8 years old. And actually in 2019, he would have been 4 or 5 years old. And we were at the Alberta Star Party and he won a telescope as a door prize.
Nice.
Wow.
It was so epic. So he was absolutely thrilled. He has his own telescope now, and we take that thing out everywhere we go. It's like on every camping trip, every observing trip we go out to the dark sites, and he's got that telescope with him, and he's working on the Explore the Universe.
Oh, wow.
Right now, which is the RESC observing program. And last weekend, actually, we were out on an observing trip just north of Calgary here at a dark site, and he forgot his observing logbook, and it was like this moment in the car, like there's no going back for it. But he was like devastated. No, my observing logbook. Like, what am I gonna do? Oh, I can relate. That tragedy.
It's so amazing. I always love it when you're at because I've been to a lot of star parties and they do like the telescope giveaway. And it's always so much fun when the young person wins the telescope, and everybody feels that they're that child again,
totally
winning
like,
that telescope.
That is so cool. Absolutely. Yeah, the joy was tangible. It was so cool.
We were talking to Berta about younger observers, and I have some nephews that have gotten into observational astronomy as well. And it's so much fun to sit around with them and talk about their observing, because their observing experience, they're unique observing experiences all on their own. But when they're telling their observing stories, it's just like talking to you or Shane or Berta. It almost feels like this really different connection with somebody. So like I go inside and my parents are like, oh, like, what were you guys talking about? I'm like, well, no, they were just telling me their observing stories. It was amazing. They were like, well, were they interesting? I'm like, well, they were to me,
Absolutely. Yeah, I know you're right. They are the same stories, just through the perspective of a child. It's almost like more electric, because it's so new to them and so full of discovery that it's contagious. It's so contagious.
Eric, do you ever use binoculars, or are you just strictly telescope?
Oh man, I have this thing with binoculars. I hate binoculars. Which is like, yeah, seriously.
This show
like,
is now over. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode.
No, seriously. Like, I know a number of good friends that just are in love with binoculars. Like, they, have amazing binoculars, have amazing, parallelogram mounts, have invested a lot of money in them, but like, they just don't fulfill for me. But honestly, like, going back to your episode a while ago with Robert, who's fabricating his own design of binoculars. Like, I loved what he was doing with trying to improve the design of binoculars such that you can improve collimation, for example. Like, that's the number one reason why I just am so frustrated with binoculars, is because they're just, never quite collimated, and I'm like trying to torque and twist the binoculars to make them collimate, and eventually just throw them in the garbage.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Eric, because I don't think we've ever had this opinion voiced on the podcast. And you just triggered a memory for me, actually. My brother, he's not an astronomer, but we love the outdoors. We do a lot of hiking and things like that together. And I always bring a pair of binoculars for birding or just seeing what's in the distance. And I would always say, hey, do you want to have a view? And he would say no. And I'm like, why don't you bring binoculars? And he's like, I hate them because I think, to your point, the binoculars he always had looked through were never collimated. He's like, man, I can never merge the images. I see two of everything. I hate it. And then finally he latched on to a pair of binoculars that worked for him. And now he brings them out when we do our outdoor activities. But I think it's a really important point that, maybe if somebody has been frustrated with the usage of binos for those reasons, here's the explanation. And, having something like what Robert is building might solve that for some people, which would be pretty awesome, because it works. Yeah.
I loved hearing his project about trying to overcome those design challenges that have been kind of just ignored by mass-produced binoculars for so long. But I do I definitely have had some amazing views through good quality binoculars, but the price point for really good binoculars is definitely an obstacle.
It's agreed.
They're really expensive to get a good pair of binoculars.
I remember I bought a pair of Vixen Jomas, which were, I'm trying to think, and this is quite a few years ago. I think they're around $400, give or take. And they're a beautiful, very lightweight, like a 21 or 22 ounce 7x50. And I had them for a couple of years and had moved to Ontario. And my observing partner there, Tim, phenomenal observer, like you, same opinion, didn't like binoculars and similar things. And one night he said, why do you use those things? And I'm like, well, they're good. You can see things. You can find stuff quick. He goes, yeah, I never found that with binoculars. I said, here, try these. And then he tried them. He was like, oh, well, these are good. How much are they? And then I told him, he said, I would just rather buy a new eyepiece.
It is true. I probably would go towards the eyepiece too. And then just borrow a friend's that have really good binoculars.
Yeah. What telescopes did you own after that initial Costco scope, and maybe progressing into what you have now? We talked a little bit about that, but just to kind of line it up for people.
Yeah, I had an 8-inch Dob that my dad helped me build when I was a teenager. We got a commercial mirror and some awesome 1950s book from the Edmonton RESC library.
Nice.
With a telescope Dobsonian design. There's actually, oh man, I totally forgot about this until just now, but in the base, the azimuth bearing, the design called for using a vinyl, an actual record.
Yeah, that was John Dobson's original design, is to use a record.
Yes. So there is literally a record of Russian choral music in this telescope, and it's just singing away all night long. It's so awesome. But yeah, I had that 8-inch telescope for a very long time, probably almost 20 years, just hauling that thing all over the place. I had a rigid tube, sonotube, the thing was built like a tank. But then well, you remember the Saturn Jupiter conjunction in 2020.
Yep.
Like the night that everyone is waiting for, we go out, the whole family, we're set up, have this beautiful clear view to the west. It's getting dark out. I have my terrible crappy binoculars scanning the western sky, trying to like wait for that burst moment where I can see Jupiter and Saturn as it's getting dark. And all of a sudden behind me, I hear this like wham, and I turn around and my son is standing there looking up at me with the most horrified look in his face, and the telescope is like smashed on the ground.
Oh, no.
Totally, like, tube is crushed, mirror rolled out of the tube. It's like in the snow, and I'm like looking at the western sky. Jupiter and Saturn are like just about to become visible, and I don't have a telescope. I died inside. I literally died inside. And then that whole night, my buddy is texting me like 5 million times, like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen through a telescope.
Where's your sketch, Eric?
I can't believe this view. Oh my God. And I'm just like, I can't believe this is happening. How is this actually happening? So I never even saw it.
Oh, gee.
Oh, too funny. Life is awesome. But then the mirror was fine. Both mirrors. And then that was when the birth of the suitcase Dob came. So they're the same mirrors. And I rebuilt it into this suitcase Dob model that actually came from Cloudy Nights, a guy in Europe who has a design for a super compact Dobsonian. And I kind of was looking at his pictures and, you know, drawing up some plans, and just built it and put it together. And that's my new 8-inch.
So what did you progress to after that 8-inch? It seems you kept it around for a while, but I know you've had some other equipment. What else is in your stable?
Recently, about 2 years ago now, actually, there was a 17.5-inch Discovery Dobsonian that came up for sale in Edmonton, which is only 3 hours drive north. So I actually picked that up. It was a used telescope, about 11 years old, has a tracking drive in it.
Oh, wow.
Which is a game changer. Holy smokes. Really, I was not looking for a telescope that tracks, and this one came up and it had it, and it was the right moment, and I got it, and I am so glad that it tracks. It's like, wow, game changer.
Mm-hmm. Well, that must be almost essential for somebody who enjoys sketching, especially with a big Dob like that.
Absolutely, yes, because you're constantly working at high powers. Like the lowest possible power I can get on that telescope with a 35 mil panoptic is 63 times. That's my lowest power. So I'm typically well over 100 power all the time. So tracking, absolutely. With sketching, it's critical. At least I've gotten really used to it.
Yeah, I think Howard Banich and Alistair Ling were talking a little bit about that when they were on the show, and their experiences with using sort of larger and larger instruments was that tracking really does become quite key in order to be making those kind of observations like you're saying.
It does, because it really unlocks the opportunity to just sit on an object and not be disturbed by chasing it constantly. Like you can just really sit with it and linger and let the details come out.
That's why I bought the AZEQ6, even though I'm not going to use a lot of the go-to capabilities as much, but just to be able to point it at something and have it track along. Even this past week, when I was testing out an eyepiece, got one of those Explorer Science 17 mil, 92 degrees. And I had that in my TAC 100 millimeter, but tracking. And I didn't even really set the tracking up proper. I just sort of jammed it in and pointed it and turned the sidereal tracking on. It would stay in the field of view for like 20 or 30 minutes, which was nice because we were really trying to run the eyepiece through its paces, and we didn't do any sketching or anything, but it was a lot of fun just to be able to have it there and then go and look through Mike's Takahashi 78 and back and forth to mine. Do you have any other instruments that you're using for sketching and observing?
Not really, although I have used a number of instruments. For example, our club observatory south of Calgary, we have a 14-inch Schmidt Cassegrain, which is the only Schmidt Cassegrain I've really used a lot. I actually did quite a few of my Messier sketches using that telescope. And then also, we have quite a number of club telescopes. We have a 12-inch f5 Dobsonian that I've used for a couple of wider field objects. And also we have a 13-inch, I think it's an f4 telescope. It might even be a bit faster than f4, but it's again, that thing, good aperture, super wide fields. It is a workhorse. I love that thing. So yeah, I love using a bunch of different instruments for sketching, but like honestly, the club, having the equipment at our fingertips through the club is so handy. I love using like different telescopes all the time, mixing it up.
Yeah, one of the huge advantages of a club to me is the opportunity to use a whole bunch of different gear that maybe you don't have yourself, and it can tell you what you like and maybe don't like. I'm not sure I would own a hydrogen alpha telescope if I was never a member of the Regina Club, but as a member, looking through some of the other folks' H alpha telescopes, my mind was blown, and I really wanted one then. So
absolutely,
that's like, I just love that aspect of the club, in addition to like, the socialization and finding observing buddies and things like that. But, just being able to test stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I find sometimes there are objects where you could get a better view if you had a different instrument. And like sometimes you can plan that out. Like, for example, a couple of years ago at the Alberta Star Party, I really wanted an awesome view of the Andromeda Galaxy while we're out there, which I can't really get with a 17.5-inch Dob. Like, oh, nice core. Like, that's all you can see. In our club, we have a 4-inch Teleview refractor, and that thing was spectacular and so much fun. Like, yeah, having these certain instruments that are best used for particular uses, particular objects, like that's where it's a lot of fun to mix and match your observing plans and use different instruments to improve the view of those things.
We've corresponded quite a bit. We're on the same sketching forum with the RASC, so I've always marveled at your sketches. They're quite beautiful. And I was just wondering, what is your background for drawing and sketching? Like, do you have an arts background of any sort, or were you taught drawing? How did you get into that? How did you get into the astronomical sketching?
I have no sketching background at all. And like, I'm really good at drawing like a stick man. And that's about it. Actually, like in my work, I'm a carpenter. We do a lot of sketching, you could say, of, conceptualizing ideas, plans, that kind of thing, like super basic sketching. That's kind of the limit of my sketching skills. But other than that, honestly, astro sketching, to me, when I first heard about it, I'm like, ooh, this looks doable. Like some dots, some smudges, cool. Like, I can do this. Lots of practice. I actually did start sketching when I was a teenager, and just super simple stuff, but didn't really get into it in a bigger way until about 4 or 5 years ago.
What prompted you to start doing it then?
I think the first catalyst was stumbling upon a set of tutorials on the RASC website by Carol Lacomiac. Super great tutorials for like just super brief, very brief, like here's how to sketch a globular cluster in a galaxy and a nebulae. You know, after some practicing sketching from photographs in daytime just to like practice these techniques, that's when I kind of realized, oh, this is a thing. This is cool. Like I enjoy this. I could see doing this. And then during COVID, one of my projects became like I just suddenly had this idea of like I want to sketch all Messier objects in one calendar year, and just like as the seasons go, like pick them off one by one and sketch them all. And that was really a project that turned the page. Like it's like, okay, now I'm sketching regularly, consistently for, you know, a whole year. And that really developed a love for sketching now all the time, whenever I'm observing.
What techniques are you using for sketching? I was wondering, I know that sketch that we were showing earlier of the comet and the globular cluster was, I believe, just black charcoal on white paper that was inverted in software. Are you primarily using that technique, or are you using some of the white charcoal and white ink on the black paper yet?
Primarily white paper with graphite pencils. I definitely find I can get sharper stars and like sharper details. Actually, the one tool I find the most important of anything is the mechanical eraser.
Oh, okay.
It's so like you can really dial in some fine detail with that thing. Life without that is just like no good. It's as important as the pencils. I still haven't really gotten the technique down with black paper and pastel. For example, the stars. Well, pastel pencils I find are hard to get a really sharp pinpoint star.
Yeah, you've got to use the sandpaper, right, with them to like hone that tip. Yeah.
Totally. Or even actually I experimented with white gel pens.
Yeah, that's what Berta was talking about.
Nice.
I bought the set. They're over on the other side of the room. I won't get them. But I bought the set she recommended. It was actually the cheapest set of white gel pens. It's just called the Jelly Roll pens, not to be confused
I'm pretty sure I have one of those. Yeah, totally.
And they work pretty good. I've just been playing here at my desk, like when I'm waiting for Shane to show up or something. And yeah, I mean, you could see they look pretty good. She was talking about what she does is she puts the white ink down, and then she'll take a colored pencil when there's a color, like a particularly colored star, and she'll, like, you know, for example, like an M11, you know, there's that orangish star there, and then color over that with the appropriate colored pencil, and it looks fantastic. I had to ask her about it because I thought she was fooling around with softwares, because that's the only other way I've seen people do that before. But anyway,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so you've been experimenting a little bit as well. I haven't fully transitioned over. I find I go and do it. It's almost like that requires you to be more of a dedicated artist, in my opinion, because when I'm doing my regular sketches and then I transition to that, it takes 2 or 3 nights and then I can do them. But if I give it up for like 2 or 3 weeks, or like this winter, I haven't done any, I know I have to go and start climbing the mountain all over again. It's just going to be basically starting right back at square one for me, because it is really like requires some sort of artistic ability to do it, and I have to like redevelop those skills all over again.
Right. Yeah. I find too with white paper, there are way more sketchbooks available. Like you can find better sketchbooks with better paper if going with white paper, whereas black selections are fewer.
I found this too, and there's a art store nearby. This was sort of a good thing came out of a bad thing. The local Michael's burned down, and that's where most people buy their art supplies. And so this art supply store started getting in more and more stuff, and they're kind of filling that niche now. And they've brought in these beautiful hardcover black paper books. And I was just wandering around in there one day, and they're perfect. They're just like 7x8, or they're weird size, but they're a great size for sketching at the eyepiece. And I was so excited. I'm like, this is going to be a game changer for what I'm doing. I wasn't telling them what I was doing. They would think it was so weird, but I was like, this is going to be a game changer. And they're looking at me, and I'm buying all these white charcoal and pastel pens and sandpaper. They're like, what is this guy doing? So
I love it. That's awesome.
But I bought some of those hog brushes for the and so I wore one out, and I went back, and I'm like, do you have anything tougher than a hog brush? They're like, what?
What were you doing to it? That's awesome.
Yeah, I bought some other ones, but anyway, yeah, the sketching is fun. So you're pretty much sketching whenever you're at the eyepiece, even with the 17.5. There's one thing I was going to ask is, do you find sketching at the eyepiece when you have to be up on the ladder of the 17.5-inch scope? Does that require a special skill set, or do you find that fairly comfortable? For me, I've never sketched at a telescope where I need to be on a ladder before. What's that like, and is that enjoyable?
I haven't fallen off the ladder completely yet. There have been some close calls, but it's not terrible. I have definitely wondered whether it would be possible to like jerry rig like a bicycle seat with a hook on it that I could like hook onto a ladder rung and like precariously perch upon the top of the bicycle seat and like sit. I don't know. I will try it one day, but at the moment it's comfortable enough to stand on the ladder that I haven't sought out any major design. I find like if I go on a long run the day of an observing session, my legs will be really tired on the ladder, but otherwise it's not bad.
Let's talk about Hawaii. All right. Tell us about the Hawaii trip. Give us the rundown.
Man, Hawaii was amazing. The trip was not planned around the moon. And as I like to schedule like my observing when the moon is absent, there was really only 1 or 2 nights when we would be there with no moon in the sky, and that would be in the very early hours of the morning. So when we arrived, the weather forecast was not looking good for any of these potential moonless nights. And the only night was that first night that we arrived. So we literally got to Hawaii, got to our accommodations, and I said goodnight to my wife and son and got in the car and drove straight up Mauna Kea, like right then and there at midnight in Hawaii. Like it's go time. Like it's now or never. Of course, it's 100% cloudy.
Yeah.
But like, this is the one chance, right? Like, you're not going to go to sleep. Like, no, that's not happening. We're going to drive all the way to the top, just to the visitor center, and see what happens. Soon before reaching, like, it's just totally cloudy. And right before, maybe 2 miles before the visitor center, the sky's clear. We punched above the clouds. And oh man, that was just electric to see that sky beyond all hope, clear.
That's awesome. That is so good.
Oh, but yes, so many amazing sights from there. It's just stunning.
How many hours were you able to get in at the eyepiece?
Probably about 3 hours total, 3 or 4 hours.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a sprint. I planned the session very intensely because I knew I would have very limited time. So I knew exactly like what objects I wanted to prioritize.
Yep.
That was super key.
I did a full session on Haleakala, and I had it just so mapped out. You're just almost like a machine, right? You know right where you're going, right from one object to another, because you just know that drinking from this well, it's going to be a long time before you come back to that tap. And like you, when I drove up, I did 2 nights, but there was like one night I arranged to be up there in the Star City, and I drove through like a hurricane on the way up. It was like driving rain in that. And then, like you say, you just sort of at some point, like at 7,000 or 8,000 feet, you just sort of break through the clouds.
Yes.
And then it's just like still and calm, just like in the airplane, right? When you go through that cloud deck, it doesn't matter what's happening down below. It's what's happening up top that matters.
Oh yeah. Those are the moments where you just got to show up.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't be anything, but if it turns out good, like you can't trade that for the world.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of Eta Carina that night?
Oh, the whole southern sky was amazing. Actually, by the time I got up there, Eta Carina was already set because it was so late at night. But basically, Centaurus was at the meridian, and so I pretty much lived in there for the majority of the night. And actually there was a bit of cloud hugging the southern horizon. I could see the Southern Cross flickering in and out, but honestly, like, it was one of the things I really wanted to plan out was to avoid the temptation to be like looking at the horizon, like, oh, I want to see like what's the lowest declination I can see. No, like let's look high. Let's enjoy the views of things that I can see from home, but only barely. But here they're like 40 degrees in the above the horizon. Like those were some of the best views, actually. Like some of the lower objects that I never get to see certainly were phenomenal to look at. But for example, M83, which is very difficult to see at our latitude at 51 degrees north, it literally is 40 degrees up, and you could see tremendous detail in it with just an 8-inch.
You've got a couple sketches here, the Centaurus A and the Omega Centauri.
Yes, the Omega Centauri was it was the first southern object I looked at. The very, very first object I looked at in that observing session was M13. Because before I looked at Omega Centauri, I wanted to kind of go back to baseline, go to something I know well, and just refresh my memory. Okay, here I'm using my 8-inch. With this eyepiece, like, here's the view I know and love of M13, and then panned over to Omega Centauri. Oh, what is actually going on right now? What am I looking at? Like, I literally almost fell over. It blew me away how big it is. The brightness was less bright than I was expecting, I've got to say, but the size of it was just tremendous. And from such a dark sky, resolution seemed infinite, like just in an 8-inch telescope. Very, very faint members, absolutely diffuse core, like not a dense core at all. Like, it just was like this ocean of super faint stars, all even brightness. Like, it was mind-blowing.
I love that tactic too, of looking at M13 first, something you know very well, and then going to something brand new and just seriously have that comparison fresh. That's awesome.
And like, I kept kind of going back and forth between like Omega Centauri M13 and also M4, because that's another one that suffers greatly from our latitude. And honestly, I think M4 was better than M13. Like, it was more interesting to look at, I found. Wow, the southern sky, globular clusters, man, in the southern sky. Like, they've got it going on. It's so epic. It's crazy. Every globular cluster is like way bigger than M13. It's wild. I pretty much just gobbled globular clusters that night, which was unexpected.
Did you take a look at that false comet in the bottom of Scorpius there, NGC 6231?
Yes, I did. I had a brief look at that because I had looked at that one in Nebraska last summer, but there even it was very, very, very low. And so, I mean, it's a very bright open cluster, so it was punching through. Here, it was just blasting, glowing bright, like unbelievable.
Like a miniature version of the Alpha Persei, right? Like, it looks like that sort of same sort of. Yeah, I've seen it. I saw it from Haleakala, and it truly blew me away. But I've seen it from 44 degrees north in Nova Scotia over the North Atlantic.
No way.
Had a couple good mornings.
That's amazing.
I've got sketches of it over on the shelf. It really benefits from those lower latitudes when you're down there at 20 degrees.
It does. Yeah. It really does. And I think that was one of the, like, as brief as my session was, I was really glad I spent time on familiar objects that are super low at my normal latitude. You know, views of Markarian's chain in Virgo was one, like, it was literally at zenith.
Overhead, yeah.
That was gold. And so many other amazing surprises, but really had fun looking at the objects that I never get to see from here as well.
How did you take the 2-inch filters I loaned you?
I did. I didn't have time to even use them, though. I was just like going from this object to the next object. And yeah, honestly, I don't even think I might have looked at like one planetary nebula, but otherwise it was mostly just galaxies and globular clusters. So the filters stayed in the case that night, but they did enjoy the trip to Hawaii.
Yeah. One of my favorite places on Earth, you know, astronomically and during the daytime, it's just, it's a wonderful place.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other further thoughts for listeners?
One of the things I would say is to just never trust the forecast. I can't even count the number of observing sessions that I've gone out and it's showing to have mediocre skies, and it just turns out to be an amazing night. You find something that's unexpected, or maybe the sky is cloudy in one area and you jump to an area that you don't otherwise usually visit. I would just say go out even when the weather isn't optimal, because there's always something to see and learn.
Thanks a lot, Eric. This has been a ton of fun. Your passion and your determination are very inspirational. So this was very enjoyable for me, and I'm going to take my telescope out and do some observing now, because it's just about getting to that time.
Yes, no kidding. It's time. It's go time.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, this was a lot of fun. I hope we get to meet up in Grassland sometime. That would be awesome.
Well, thanks, Eric. And thanks, everybody, for listening. Dear listeners, please subscribe and do us a favor and share the show with other stargazers you know. And you can always reach us at actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.